Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. Moving to a new country is never easy, especially when you're starting from scratch. But my family and I were excited to begin a new chapter in our lives in the Czech Republic. We had found a beautiful house on the outskirts of the city, with plenty of room for all of us. It was a dream come true. However, things took a turn for the worse when we met our neighbor Karen. From the moment we introduced ourselves, she seemed cold and distant, but we didn't think much of it at the time. We were too excited about our new home to worry about one unfriendly neighbor. But then, just a few days after we moved in, the police showed up at our door. Karen had called them, accusing us of breaking into the house and stealing her belongings. It was a shock to us all, as we had just moved in and barely had any furniture or belongings of our own. Thankfully, we were able to provide the police with the legal documents proving that we were the rightful owners of the property. They left, but we couldn't shake the feeling that Karen had it out for us. Over the next few weeks, Karen continued to make false accusations against us. She called the police multiple times, claiming that we were abusing our children, dealing drugs, and even throwing wild parties late at night. We knew that these accusations were baseless, but it was still unnerving to constantly be on edge, waiting for the next false claim. We tried to ignore Karen and go about our lives as usual, but it was difficult. Our children were becoming anxious and scared, and we were starting to feel like prisoners in our own home. One day, Karen took things too far. She showed up at our door demanding that we stop our children from playing in the backyard because it was disturbing her. We tried to reason with her, but she refused to listen. Suddenly, Karen lunged at my wife, grabbing her by the arm and trying to pull her outside. I immediately stepped in, pushing Karen away from my wife and telling her to leave. Karen didn't take kindly to being pushed away. She called the police, claiming that I had attacked her and that I was a danger to the community. The police arrived and we were forced to give our side of the story. Thankfully, the police believed us and Karen was given a warning. But we knew that this wasn't the end of it. Sure enough, Karen continued to harass us, making our lives a living hell. We tried to keep our heads down and not let her get to us, but it was difficult. But then, one day, karma finally caught up with Karen. She was caught in a hit-and-run accident, and the police found drugs and stolen property in her car. It turned out that Karen had been a notorious criminal in the area, and she had been using us as a scapegoat to cover up her own misdeeds. We watched as Karen was taken away in handcuffs, finally getting what she deserved. It was a bittersweet victory, but we were relieved to finally be free of her constant harassment. And as for our own family, we were finally able to enjoy our new home without fear of false accusations or harassment. It had been a long and difficult journey, but we had come out on top. Update. A few months after Karen's arrest, we received a letter from the police department. It turned out that Karen had been involved in a large-scale criminal ring, and the police were looking for any information we might have to help with their investigation. We were shocked to learn that Karen had been living a double life, and that her criminal activities had been going on for years without anyone suspecting a thing. The police were grateful for any information we could provide, and we were happy to help in any way we could. As it turned out, Karen had been involved in everything from drug trafficking to theft, and the police were able to make numerous arrests thanks to the information we provided. It was a small comfort to know that we had played a part in bringing justice to the victims of Karen's crimes. In the months that followed, our family settled into our new home and our new community. We made friends with our neighbors, and we even began to participate in community events and activities. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Years ago, my mother and I had just moved to a new dog-friendly apartment complex. We had 2 dogs. One was a Bichon Shih Tzu and the other was a Terrier Poodle mix. Because of them, we were excited about the community dog park right next to our building. Also, our whole building was filled with dog owners, each with dogs ranging from small to huge. Our apartment was on the first floor in the back of the building, all the way in the corner. It was a nice private area for us with how the apartments were situated. Since one of our dogs is a terrier, he can be a bit barky when we are not home. Though when we are home, we have a clicker to get his attention, which he has been trained to stop barking and come to whoever has the clicker. Due to our work hours, I was usually home in the morning and Mom was home in the afternoon, leaving him alone for a few hours during the day. After a month of moving to our new apartment, we received a note on our door. It was from one of our neighbors. It stated, "Dear neighbor, I understand that you are new to this complex, but it is rude to allow your dog to bark. It is ruining my sleep before I go to work, and my job is extremely important. I don't care how you do it, but shut your dog up." My mom turned in the note right away to the leasing office as she wasn't sure what to do with it. That is when the office told us not to worry because he had done this to every dog owner in the building. They did ask us to see if we can find ways to calm him down when we were not home. So we did. We found out the kids of the neighborhood liked playing with the power station outside our apartment, and that is who he had been barking at. So we closed off that area for him when we went out and no one was home. We started playing calming music as a way to help as well. Another week goes by, and this time we hear a knock at the door. We go outside and we meet our angry neighbor. He explains that our dog has kept him up every day and woke him up with his hours of barking. Both of us had been home that day, and our dog had been a good boy and had not had excessive barking. I still remember what he had told us when I explained that. "I know what I heard. If you can't control your dog, then I am going to call animal control and have them both taken from you. I did it before and have no problem getting rid of your dogs too. Then I'll get you kicked out for not following your lease, and I can do that because I am very rich and the apartment needs my money. So do something to shut your dogs up or else." After that, and my mom apologizing for what had happened, we went back in. A few moments later, I walked out to get the mail and discovered from another neighbor that he had gone to 3 other apartments and made similar threats. After some convincing, my mom told the apartment what had happened. We were told not to worry, and if he did that again, to please contact them. We also found out that the apartment had offered him an apartment away from the dogs, but he had declined since the dogs were the problem and not him. However, what he had done, my mom began to show signs of anxiety and bought a lemon spray bark collar for our dog. While I didn't like this idea, it had put her at ease to go outside our apartment. We did make sure to only put it on him when we both were not home. A month went by peacefully. Then once again we get a knock on our door. This time it was animal control. They had gotten an anonymous report of a dog being abused and neglected in our home. They explained that someone has said that our dogs were barking because of neglect. My mom invited the AC lady inside and explained the situation. We showed her everything we could to prevent our dogs from being taken away. The nice lady noticed how playful and happy our dogs were and figured it was another false call. She explained that they had gotten a few of those from an anonymous concerned neighbor for other apartments in this building. The AC lady left, telling us that if they are threatened again to try and get it on record. This event had turned my mom into a paranoid person who became afraid to leave the house, thinking that if she did, then she would lose her pups. Normally, I am the calmest person in my family, never really letting anyone get to me, but this neighbor had done this to hurt us. So I did my research and discovered a few things that could legally help us. With new information on certain laws and leasing terms, I formed a plan. During a weekend that my mom was visiting my aunt in a different state, I began my plan. I started it by printing out a few things and then sat outside with my phone and a speaker. I began to play a video of a dog barking really loud. I had figured out which apartment was his thanks to a few neighbors who also were tired of being harassed. I sat there looking across the courtyard to where his apartment was. I waited with a huge smile on my face, and as I hoped for, he stormed out and headed over to where I was. I turned off my video and turned on my recorder without him noticing. His face is red with anger as he looks at me sitting there with a smile. "I'm sorry, can I help you?" I ask him. "Duck you. I Fing told you what I will do to your family if you Fing didn't stop your dumb mutt from ruining my sleep. Now I'm going to get them taken from you and get you kicked out for not doing as I said. I gave you a ducking chance. I hope when they take your dogs that they are killed and you and your mom live inside a cardboard box." I give him a fake "oh dear" look and say, "So you are saying that I am not allowed to make loud noises, including my dogs barking between the hours of 7 a.m. and 11 p.m., and that I went against the law by doing so?" "You know you did." "And you are telling me this from my porch? At 2 p.m. in the afternoon? This won't be your porch once I tell the leasing office." "Oh noes, that is a very serious threat for my dogs and my family, isn't it?" "Duck, yes it is." I give him a huge smile and turn off my recorder from my phone. The neighbor is confused now and I ask him to have a seat. I have a few things to show him. I pull out my papers and hand him the first one. It was the county's noise ordinance laws. In our county, a dog's bark was considered the same amount of sound as a loud appliance, so they can bark between the hours of 7 a.m. and 11 p.m. Before he could talk, I pull out another paper. This one states that it is against the leasing terms to threaten another neighbor, and after one warning, the apartment complex had the right to revoke their lease. He looks at me with an understanding of what he had done now. I silence him and pull out one last paper. This one was another leasing term I had found. This face, after reading this one, had made him turn white. This last one talked about how it was a complete violation of leasing terms to go onto another renter's property and threaten them or their property. This includes the renter's outdoor area. Those found guilty of this violation will have their lease revoked immediately and be forced to leave the apartment within a set time. The scared look on his face was priceless as I silently got up and walked back into my apartment. After he finally left, I called my leasing office and explained what had just happened and agreed to email the recording to them right away. A week later, my mom came home with some news that she had learned from the leasing office. The man had been evicted from his apartment and would be leaving later that week. I found out that my actions had caused the other dog owners of the building to come forward and admit what he had been doing to all of them. After that, there was never another complaint, and I threw away the lemon spray collar. My mom still gets anxiety attacks once in a while, but has been getting help to ease those worries. As for me, I don't regret what I did. I just feel bad that it had to come to this. The next one is a petty revenge story. About 10 years ago, when my son Jay was 16, he decided he could pick and choose when to go to school. He was a good kid and made decent grades, but he really hated school. I was a single mom with a career and had to leave for work before he caught the bus. So usually I wouldn't even know when he skipped. When I finally figured out there was a problem, I tried everything imaginable to make him go to school. We argued every morning. I grounded him from everything he loved, and I even started dropping him off before going to work, putting Jay there long before school started. Unfortunately, he figured out he could walk back home. It was a rough time in our relationship, as sometimes I wanted to wring his neck, but he was a foot taller than me and built like an ox. In Texas, if a child doesn't attend school, parents can be held responsible up to and including jail time. Eventually, I received a notice from the city that further truancy would result in charges. I was freaking out and showed it to Jay. He was dismissive and said lots of parents get these notices, but nothing ever happens. So the problem continued. One of the women on my work team was engaged to a local police officer we'll call GG, would occasionally visit the office and have lunch with the team, so we were all friendly. The next time G visited, I asked him for a favor in exchange for a case of beer. He agreed to help. I waited for a day I knew Jay was skipping school and called G from work. G then went to my house and knocked on the door yelling, "Open up, police!" My son answered, at which point G gave him a fake warrant for my arrest for failing to make Jay go to school. My son told him I was not home, so G told him to pass me a message. He would be back to arrest me in the next few days. G then left and called me at work to tell me it was done. Now this next part I actually feel bad about. My son fell apart. He called me crying, barely able to speak, squeaking out that the police had come to the house to arrest me. He apologized over and over. When I got home, he was a shaky mess and white as a ghost. He couldn't even eat dinner. It was my original intention to tell him when I got home that I had set him up, but after seeing how upset he was, I couldn't bring myself to do it. I thought maybe I had gone too far. I just told him not to worry, that I'd call the city and take care of it the next day. I assured him everything would be okay. The next morning, Jay was up and dressed early, and there was zero argument about him going to school. And it went that way all the way through to his graduation. I finally confessed to my son just last year that I had staged the whole thing. Luckily, he's grown up enough to realize it was done with his best interests in mind, but he was still pretty angry. In the end, that case of beer was one of the best investments I ever made. The next one is an entitled People Story. At first, my brother and grandmother only got worse. My grandmother turned into a crying wail again when my brother told her he was moving out. Then he had the gall to ask for mine and our parents' help to move his stuff because Grandma was saying she wouldn't let him leave. But our parents just reminded him of the crap he'd done to end up in his current situation. And rather than act like a rational human being, he decided he'd do just the opposite. He blamed me for ruining his life again, and my father told me he actually busted a gut laughing at my brother when he said that. Then laid into my brother over how he was blaming his own crap on me, and my 30-year-old brother curled up in a chair crying. He refused to leave our parents' house that night and stayed curled up on the couch with a bottle of booze until the next day, in which he was kicked out by our parents with a raging hangover. Our father told him he needed to apologize to me for real face-to-face, and that they'll no longer consider him their son if he doesn't. It took my brother a couple of days, but he showed up at my place with a piece of paper in hand and read out an apology he'd pre-written. He said he was so sorry for everything he'd done. He'd been a crappy person and an even crappier brother. He looked for any way he possibly could in his own head to make me the bad guy. But the excuses just aren't there anymore. He can't ever undo the things he did. But he wants to move forward and try to mend our relationship as siblings, starting with GTFO of Grandma's house. He told me he understands why none of us want to be there and that he'll hire help. We ended up shaking hands and having a hug. And thus far, he's actually been working hard to improve himself, even cutting down on his drinking by a lot. As for my grandma, she did try to keep my brother from moving out, and she refused to let the movers he hired in. He had to get the help of a police officer to keep her at bay. They only had to move out one room's worth of stuff, and with the movers and my brother working at it, they got all of his stuff out of there in record time. My grandma ended up threatening to unalive herself while he was leaving, or so my brother said. But I'm pretty sure that was the exact truth, because she did actually try. But in the most attention-seeking way possible, she took a bunch of pills and then called cop on herself. They took her to the hospital and got her stomach pumped, which was a bit redundant, as she'd thrown up before the ambulance even arrived, but they wanted to be sure. My parents ended up getting APS involved, as Grandma ended up on another psyche hold, only this time in a hospital bed. During her stay, they did several tests on her because she avoided doctors for years, and she was found to be in bad health. Her kidney function was low, her lungs weren't in very good shape, and she was at heavy risk of diabetes. So Grandma had to be put in a care facility for her own health and safety. It actually didn't surprise me much. She was a little woman but had some weight on her, and all her teeth had to come out when she was in her 50s because the only thing she would drink is soda, and she ate a lot of sugary foods. She especially loved chocolate. She also used to be a heavy smoker in her younger years, and I guess that did some lasting damage to her lungs. She'd been having breathing trouble for some time, but somehow hid it from us all. Doctors found that she needed to be put on oxygen and that she couldn't live alone anymore. She wanted my brother to come back and become her full-time caregiver, but he refused and said that he just can't. He's got his own life to live, and he's got a lot to make up for with the rest of us. Well, my grandma went crazy crying and throwing things in the hospital while screaming at us all to get out. After she was out of the hospital, my parents worked to have Grandma put in a care home. They moved a few of her personal belongings into a room there to try and make her more comfortable, but that didn't really do much of anything. She was there all of a week and said she was incredibly miserable. All the employees treated her like a child, and she had to have an oxygen breather attached to her at all times. She also said she hated being there because, in her words, the place was filled with old people. And she hated being reminded that she's old too and would rather be alone. She was there nearly a month before trying to unalive herself again by refusing to wear her oxygen breather and saying she'd hang herself with the tubes. They had to put her on close observation 24/7, which only made her even more miserable. Each time we saw her, she begged us, even begged me to take her out of that place. She missed her home and she missed her old life, but she wasn't going anywhere because she was considered a danger to herself. Eventually, she just seemed to accept her fate that she would spend the rest of her life living in the care home, and my grandma pretty much just shut down. She became that bitter old woman that hardly talks to anyone. We paid her regular visits, but she was never happy to see us, me especially. And the months just blurred together with this routine. Things seemed to change a little when we told her my wife was pregnant, and she perked up at that. My wife reluctantly let her feel her belly when we visited, and that seemed to make her day. If anything, it made Grandma a bit nicer to all of us, but she was generally still her mean old self. Then, some time ago, we found out Grandma had a stroke in her sleep and passed away. The funeral was a bit lackluster. My mother was really the only one who cried. Most of us were just really quiet the whole time. And then we had a small family reunion at my parents' house. But if anyone here was thinking we'd be singing Ding Dong the Witch is Dead, well, no. It was mostly just awkward conversations, as a lot of us didn't have much good to say about her. And she'd already passed away, so what good would it do any of us to talk about how toxic of a person she was in life either? So there wasn't much to do but stand around and get drunk. And get drunk we did. But it was more like a party full of sad, quiet drunks. Everyone dressed in black and gulping down beer or wine. Anytime someone wanted to do something fun, it just got really awkward till they shut up or decided to stay quiet or leave. And my wife wasn't there since she stayed home after the funeral because she couldn't drink and didn't want to be surrounded by people drinking. My brother is showing some genuine improvement. Grandma was his biggest enabler, and she's no longer with us. He applied for therapy last year to try and better understand himself and make a better effort to change. For now, he's trying to help out our father with remodeling the attic in his spare time, and things are still awkward between us anytime we see each other. Right now, I can't say how things will go in the long run at all. But without Grandma's toxic influence, hopefully, everything will change for the better. As for Grandma's estate, well, her will was surprisingly fair. We were all certain my brother would get everything since he was her favorite. But instead, my parents got her house, and they are working to get it ready to be rented out. The rest of Grandma's money and assets were pretty evenly distributed. Well, mostly I didn't get much, but I didn't want it either. I'm doing fine, and I didn't need it. I guess that concludes everything. Looking back on everything that happened, it's easy to see how things could have been different if my brother had made better choices, and if my grandma had been more responsible with her health. But it's also important to remember that everyone involved was just doing their best with the resources and knowledge they had at the time. As for me, I've learned a lot about forgiveness and how it can be a powerful tool for healing. It wasn't easy to forgive my brother for the things he did, but I'm glad we were able to move forward and rebuild our relationship. And even though my grandma could be difficult and toxic at times, I still loved her and will always remember the good times we had together. In the end, life is messy, and things don't always turn out the way we want them to. But with patience, understanding, and a little bit of grace, we can find a way to make it through even the toughest of times. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.